What's good, guys? VenomousStare. We're going to talk about the upcoming proposed changes. Now, these changes are very drastic, and Blizzard has actually put out a test map that you can go and play and actually try out these changes and see how they feel. It's not like they just announced all the stuff and they're dropping it on us. They're going to have this little test map probation period going on, kind of like a beta for a couple months, and then in November they're going to drop the patch. So let's get into what they're proposing to do, because it's very severe. Economy. Now, in HOTS and in Wings of Liberty, there were more minerals per base. In Legacy of the Void, Blizzard addressed a common complaint, which was from HOTS and Wings of Liberty, which was you just get 3 bases and max out. There's not a real emphasis on spreading out and taking a bunch of different bases. It's kind of a big focus on, okay, 65 workers, make 200 supply of army. And then the bases, theoretically, as someone who would say this would argue, the bases could mine for so long where there was real no incentive to take a 4th. It would be kind of precarious to hold. So Blizzard said, okay, we're going to gut half of the minerals. And what do I mean by that? In StarCraft, there's 8 mineral patches per base. They took half of them and reduced their count way down to 900. Now, this had the desired effect of encouraging people to take more bases and making 2 base all-ins less powerful. But Blizzard is kind of toning it back here and saying, well, the bases kind of mine out a little too fast, so they're keeping the smaller 900 minerals the same, but they're making the bigger 1500 stacks go up to 1800, and they are increasing Vespene gas from 2000 to 2250. Okay, so that's pretty much the sum of the economy change. Now, what do I think about that? I think it's good. I like the change of reducing the minerals per base, but I think as it stands, you do mine out a little bit too quickly. And as for the gas, like, I don't really think that's going to be all that significant, to be honest. Okay, so the mule. This is a big one. This is ridiculous. So they're making it where the mule can mine gas. And I don't have any idea how strong that's going to make mech, but I can tell you this. You can now do so many different tech builds in the early game as Terran. You drop that mule down on the gas. No longer are you bottlenecked as Terran by the 2. If you're doing, let's just say you want to do like a 1 base build. 1-1-1 or 2 port Banshee or something that requires a lot of tech and gas, not like a 6 Rax Marine SCV. Now that you have this mule drop, you can tech right up into those valuable units that you really need. You can get the upgrades that you need. You can get let's just look at 2 Starport Banshee. As it stands, if you go 2 Starport Banshee and do it perfectly, the build will not time out for you to be able to build 2 Banshees and start Banshee speed and cloak all at the same time. Usually the way it works is you can do 1 of the upgrades and make 2 Banshees. But now with the gas, like, oh man, it's going to be amazing. For Terran players at least. So the fact that mules can mine gas, like, I don't think people understand how significant this is. You remember back in the day when Chrono Boost was actually fun to use, which by the way, they reverted Chrono Boost. We're going to get to that, back to the way it used to be, where it took energy and it was actually like a macro mechanic and fun to use where you put it on things. So let me make my point. You can use Chrono Boost as Protoss to rush to certain things very hard, and that makes it where Protoss actually has a wide range of strategies. For instance, if I'm a Protoss player and I want to do a charged Zealot timing attack, and I'm back on the Heart of the Swarm, Wings of Liberty, like Chrono Boost that required talent and wasn't just like you put it on and fucking leave it static on your production facilities for the rest of the entire game. Something you actually had to keep up with and do, you know, like a macro mechanic, like hatcheries or mules, something that had energy. I don't know why Blizzard took this away and did the new method where you... So the new method now that's being reverted is you just place the Chrono Boost and it stays on whatever you put it on and only boosts by 30 seconds. Old Chrono Boost only lasted a certain amount of time, costed energy, and boosted by 100. So the point of this is that if you can boost specific tech paths or upgrade timings out significantly faster, it's going to add a lot. It's going to like open up the game per se. It's almost like a world is your oyster type situation where before you were so limited. If you wanted to do a quick rush as Terran off of one base that was gas heavy, I mean, you were bottlenecked with the two geysers, and the strategies that you could choose were severely limited. With this, whole different ball game. I saw a post on Reddit already after like 8 hours of this map being out. Someone realized that you could use the mules to drop onto guys. Someone realized you could do this mule drop on geyser to go 5 Rex Reaper, because of course 3 Rex Reaper is the standard, and that is because you don't have the gas to support any more racks than that. Go 3 Rex Reaper. Even with not many SCVs, you usually have the money to go out and expand because of just the nature of gas. That's what the whole point of what I've been talking about is you get bottlenecked by gas. This is going to be huge for Terran. This also means that when Terran goes mech, they're no longer going to be in a position where they have to like have multiple extra factories with reactors to make Hellions or Hellbats. Obviously, you're still going to need to have those in your composition almost always in some capacity. But this is big. I feel like this could open up some like really dirty 2 or 3 factory all with tech lab pushes, because back before mules only worked on minerals, you were just bottlenecked by gas, and now that you're not bottlenecked by gas, it's really going to make Terran a completely different race, I feel like, in terms of timing attacks and mech. Now, if Terran players are famous for just going bio all the time, just like Marine Marauder medevac every single game, every matchup for years and years. So I'm kind of curious to see. I wonder how many Terran players are actually going to like hard commit to trying to learn mech and try to develop a solid mech play style. Also, the mule doesn't get as many minerals anymore. Down from 25. Okay, so now we're on to the Raven. So the way that the Raven stood before was like the Seeker missile was absurdly powerful. The point defense drone was really good, and the auto turrets were fucking insane, especially after they buffed them. They were so ludicrous they had to nerf them. Yet people still really didn't make the Raven. It was only people playing for super late game trying to mass the Raven. Now, I will admit we did see quite a bit of Raven in the ZVT meta for a while, where it became this thing where like Zerg's gonna scout and they're going to see a starport with Tech Lab and they're gonna know it's Banshee. And the Zerg just got so good at defending Hellion Banshee because Terrans have been doing it since 2012, where Terran said, okay, well they made the auto turret so insanely strong, I'll just make a Raven. And like, oh, lo and behold, the Terran player realizes the Raven is a detector. I don't have to waste 50 scans clearing creep. And even then, like, it wasn't that common, so I feel like the Raven with the Seeker missile was really obnoxious, but I feel like Blizzard really was actually getting the Raven in a good spot minus the Seeker missile. Players are actually starting to make them in TVZ openers. So, I mean, I do like these changes. And as for the mule changes, I think this is bonkers. It's going to open up the game, like, completely. I'm going to, like, go on record and say that this is probably going to, like, end up getting nerfed. It's going to fuck up a lot of stuff because it's actually so severe. So the Raven, what are they doing there? Basically, they're like changing Seeker missile to be Shredder missile, which essentially does 30 damage. Yeah, and reduces armor. So this is just a way to kind of say like, being able to run up and cast a bunch of Seeker missiles and they fly out and devastate everything isn't right. Like, I'm sure you've seen like, oh, 12 Ravens versus like a million gas Zerg late game army that's like slow as hell, you know, Broodlord type, and the Terran one's up, cast Seekers, and if they have the upgrade, even if they don't have the upgrade, the Zerg can't get away. But if they do have the upgrade, there's no chance in just obliteration. So Blizzard wanted to move away from that, and instead they're adding a lot of utility to what used to be the Seeker missile. Now it's the Shredder missile, and it gives you an armor debuff. That's great. Let's talk about the Scrambler missile. It's an anti-mechanical unit ability that disables all weapons and abilities. Now this is crazy because this does work on warp prisms and presumably dropper lords. Yeah, dropper lords, warp prisms, and medevacs. If they get hit with this, they can't drop. Now I was thinking about this, and the two situations I thought of that it would be useful the most, or I guess three. If someone's doing like a Zerg is doing like a guru build, like a 25 drone attempted elevator into your main with mass sling, like you hit it with the, if you're doing like a Raven opener, like I guess with the 25 drone variety that wouldn't, the Raven wouldn't be out in time, but someone's doing like a Ling elevator play, you could stop it with the scrambler. If someone's harassing you heavily with the warp prism, specifically with like a disruptor, where they have to run in with the warp prism, drop something, and then there's like an amount of time, and then you can hit it. But I think the scrambler missile will be like, it'll be okay. I think it'll be really useful if you can get money shots onto spellcasters. Like what if you land one of these? It'll be kind of like EMP, I guess, so I don't know. I think it'll be good. And I really like the Shredder missile change because the Seeker missile was really silly. Like even when I had games where I made mass Raven and won with Seeker missiles, it wasn't like, it's like, oh, I just obliterated their whole army. Fun. So to round things off on the Raven, we have the Repair Drone, which essentially to me, the way that I imagine, I haven't played this mod yet, but the way that I imagine this working is like you throw a PDD out and it just starts to do like a healing beam onto your mech units. And I think this is going to be really strong because Terrans are already they're already going to probably make Ravens when they go mech, just because having that mobile detection is really useful. Zerg can kind of go crazy with creep spread if you try to go mech. And I'm just imagining trying to break like a mid-game mech timing with some Siege Tank Cyclone as Zerg, you know, maybe with like Roach Hydra. And if a couple of these repair drones come out, I imagine it being like insanely hard to hold. Because think about the equivalent of a medevac being on a couple tanks. With all those HP and you're trying to burst them down. Now granted there's no PDD, so it's not like they can PDD you and do this, but I feel like this, depending on how strong this is and how hard it actually heals up mech units, I feel like this could be insanely strong. Because already, mech is the kind of army that if you go to fight it, there's a very good chance that if you run in a bad angle against siege tanks, you're just going to get absolutely obliterated. So this could make things really tricky. I feel like it could be really, really hard to break mech armies. It's crazy to me that they like buffed mech so much in the past, and then they're like, okay, now we're going to make Swarm Host Locust fly. So it's like, okay, mech might be strong, but no one's going to want to play it because you made the Swarm Host a joke. Additional changes, Widow Mines now are revealed whenever they're on cooldown. So the Widow Mine goes off, it kills your workers, and now it's available. It's no longer invisible, you can see it. Now presumably, and obviously this is the case, not presumably, this is the case, when the Widow Mine has a charge, you can't see it. So it's not like the Widow Mines are always visible, but when they're reloading, they are. The biggest thing this is going to affect is Twilight openers in PvT. Oftentimes if you do a non-robo opener in PvT, you get hit with that mine drop that's so popular, and you take devastating damage and you don't really have detection. You know, sometimes if you do have detection, it's one oracle that's across map and you just use it to kill workers. So this will help Widow Mine drops not just in the game versus Protoss. Also another big situation this will be important in. Versus Zerg, a lot of times Terran players will bring in a mine with their 2-1-1, like, you know, the stim drop build. Now, before it was like, if Zerg got surprised by that one mine, it could really do devastating damage. And if Zerg was delaying their lair, it could really be bad, especially if there was more of a mine follow-up behind the 2-1-1. Now as it stands, Zerg might take a lot of damage to that one initial mine shot, but they're not going to be in a position where they're kind of like held back purely by the mine. So very similar to Protoss in the sense that they're not just going to be completely held back in their base or kind of screwed just because of one mine. Jesus. Okay, so the Ghost. they are making Cloak they're making Cloak available by default on the Ghost. I should have just read instead of trying to figure out how to say it, Kappa. Ghosts now start with 50 energy instead of 75, and they gave them an energy upgrade. Okay, so huge Ghost buff. Now, I was thinking about this earlier. Remember when I talked so long about this mule change? The reason that I went into all that gratuitous detail is because when you think about the Ghost and how it works as a unit, the fact that it got stronger early game, it's essentially now infinitely more powerful as like a rush unit, as a cheese unit. It's like a quirky option because it comes with Cloak by default now. It's not like I was gonna say it's like a DT. It's like a DT in the sense that it's invisible, and now your opponent could potentially have to account for invisible harassment. Which, I mean, obviously Terran has Banshees, but like Banshee openers are very choreographed. You see the tech lab on the starport and it's researching. With this, I mean, yeah, there's a Ghost Academy, but Ghost Academies are much more easy to hide. Like, let me give you an example. A normal Terran base could have like 3 racks, a factory, and a starport. You fly in and see that everything looks normal, where there could actually be a proxy Ghost Academy. And I know that might sound absurd to some people, like, oh, you can just proxy anything. The difference is, so same scenario, let's say there's 3 racks in a factory and no starport. That would be fishy, or even more fishy. 3 racks, no factory, no starport. That would kind of indicate that it's proxy starport and could potentially tip you off to proxy Banshee or proxy Liberator. A lack of Ghost Academy doesn't mean anything. That's normal. You go in and scout, there's not supposed to be a Ghost Academy. Like early game especially, so that's the difference between being able to proxy with information that is unstandard and information that is standard. If someone scouts you and everything looks normal, but you hit a building and it's now going to do devastating damage, that's way different than hiding a building that is supposed to be in your base and your opponent being able to deduce that you're doing something. So the Ghost, especially with the mule change, could be pretty crazy. Ruff, I actually am really excited to see how Ruff plays the American Terran, because it seems like so many of these changes really benefit his playstyle. That's it for the Ghost. I think there might be some really nasty Ghost rushes versus Protoss, where the guy, you cloak your Ghost and EAP the mothership. Well, holy shit. Never mind. Okay, we're gonna get to that. So the Liberator got a small nerf. I'll bottom line this for you because it's kind of confusing. Essentially, before, when the Liberator went into Venn diagram mode, it got an absurd vision range. It just saw everything. Sort of like the old Adept Shade, just saw everything. But now, the Liberator doesn't get a huge vision boost, it only gets what's in the circle. So that kind of means like it can be flanked more easily. Obviously, if you're being pushed with Liberators in kind of like a siege tank fashion, breaking it from the front is almost impossible. You really have to come from the side and flank a lot of the times to break these Liberator pushes. So, I mean, this will kind of help with that. The problem is like, if you're going Liberator, and you're probably going to have Medivacs too, probably going to have Vikings if you're going full-blown mech, like, you have other stuff to spot. The one situation I guess this could help is if you're harassing a Zerg with Liberators, like their mineral line, and you go into that mode and you can't see the Queen walking around as it's avoiding the circle, but then once you take damage, you can get out anyway. I don't know. I don't really understand the purpose of this change so much. It's like they know the Liberator is really strong and not fun to play against, but they don't really want to nerf it again, so they're just kind of doing this. So they're buffing the Cyclone. As it stands, the Cyclone's anti-air attack is pretty weak because you have to cast it individually. So let's just say there's like a couple voids and you have like 6 Cyclones. The way that it stands currently is like, even though the Cyclone has a pretty big range, it doesn't do a whole lot of upfront DPS, so a lot of times, like with an Oracle or a Void Ray, like your opponent can just run away. And even if you're like following them and bee 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 bee, it doesn't work. So now the first 4 shots of the Cyclone anti-air lock-on ability fire more quickly. The total damage is the same, and they're adding an upgrade that gives you more damage to armored versus lock on. So if this is confusing, essentially the way the Cyclone shoots now is like dee 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 dee, kind of like a consistent rate. Now after the patch, when you lock on, it's gonna go dee 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 4 times, and then back to the normal dee 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 rate. So this will make it better versus oracles, because as it stands now, if you have one Cyclone and an oracle flies in, like, they can fucking kill a couple workers while you're dee 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 and then run away. But now having 1 or 2 Cyclones is going to be more of a threat. I think this is mainly focused around Protoss Stargate openers. New upgrades, smart servos. It's going to make Thor's Hellbats. It's going to make the stuff that transform faster. Whatever. I mean, like, they're buffing mechs so much. Like, this is one of these upgrades that I don't think anyone's going to give a shit about or make. So we're to Protoss now. Now earlier when I was laughing about Ghost Rushes being strong, I was going to say because you can EMP the Mothership Core. Yeah, well, they're removing Mothership Core. And they're giving the Protoss Nexus more abilities. So old school Chrono Boost is back. I've already touched on that. That might actually be my favorite patch, or my favorite change. I hated the new Chrono Boost. It was unfun to use. It was worse. It was uninspiring, and it didn't take any skill. The element of something building up with energy and you having to spend the energy because if it caps at 100 you're wasting, you're wasting resources. That is interesting. The concept of a resource you always have that all you have to do is just remember to leave it on your robo all game, not really so interesting. So I'm glad that they brought the Chrono back. This was just like such a good change. They're also giving the Nexus mass recall. Yeah, now think about that. They're giving the Nexus mass recall. This means that you can do multiple different recalls at once. So before, especially in HOTS, we saw, okay, Protoss make some sentries, they move out with the Mothership Core, throw down some force fields, and then they can tele out, like the RuneScape PKing, if something goes wrong. Well, now that each Nexus has mass recall, you can actually do multi-prong attacks and then recall them both at the same time. I feel like this could be extraordinarily frustrating to deal with against really good players, but it's weird because the recall was like pretty busted in HOTS with those sentry openers because there were no Ravagers. In theory, a good Protoss would always be able to get an edge with like sentry move outs, because with sentries and a Mothership Core, there's no risk of being caught off guard. You throw up force fields and recall. But with the Ravager just completely destroyed that metagame. Destroyed it, just like the Cannon Rush being a threat. And we see with mass recall here, this is an absolutely huge buff for recall. Mainly because you can do multiple, if you have multiple Nexus. Shield recharge. So I know what Protoss players are saying. How the hell am I going to defend early and mid game without the Mothership Core, especially drop harass? So they're replacing it with this thing called Shield Recharge. Now you might be thinking like Shield Battery from Brood War, like that sounds terrible. No. This should allow Protoss players to use more of their combat units for defense. Currently the ability works on both buildings and units. So the Shield Recharge beefs up a unit. I wonder, like, 1 energy per 3 shield restored. I wonder how fast this is going to be. And it says you can auto cast it. So I guess if you had like 3 stalkers at home defending, you could auto cast Shield Recharge. But would that work if they're full? I don't know. I'll have to experiment with that. So the Stalker, they are buffing it. They're making it do way more damage. Look at this. Before it did 10 damage and then 14 to armored. Now it does 15. 15. 10 to 15 is huge. And then 14 to 21. But they're making it shoot more slowly. And they're making the upgrades count for more. So I'm going to have to obviously play around with this to make a decisive decision on whether it will be better or worse. But overall, what the Protoss wants in the Stalker is something that packs a punch. And something that can like focus down medevacs. Like if you have essentially what you want out of your Stalker as a Protoss, is, you know, if you have 3 Stalkers in your main, you're going to want them to be able to defend drop harass. And as it stands, like, Stalker, I mean, if that medevac's getting away, Stalkers are pretty quick and they're shooting, but they're not doing a lot of damage. When the shots do more damage, that's really, really important against medevac compositions, and it really helps you focus fire important units. That's the advantage of upfront damage versus like rapid damage. And the fact that they're changing how much the upgrade gives means that basically in StarCraft, the faster units attack, the better upgrades are because of the way that the upgrade applies. You know, +1, +1, +1, +1. So that means like Marines and Zerglings and Stalkers are really good with attack upgrades. So a lot of times that's why you saw like +2 blink all-ins. The fact that they are buffing the upgrades specifically for Protoss is a way to address that. Yes, we wanted to let Stalkers still be really, really strong with attack upgrades, despite us making the weapon rate of fire way slower. I'm having a rough time with the water today. So they're changing the disruptor, and they're reducing the cooldown, and they're reducing the damage, especially versus Protoss. And they're making it where whenever you run out and the ball touches the center mass of the Purification Nova, touches something, it explodes. The way it works now, you shoot it out, it gets to the middle of the army, and then there's like a second or two of you waiting that gives your opponent the opportunity to split. Not so anymore. You can just straight up, it's not like a detonating thing that you do, it just blows up once it touches them. So they're buffing the shit out of the Colossus. Essentially what they're doing is, this is like mind-blowing. Damage changed from 12 to 10, so that it was a very slight reduction in damage from 12 to 10, and then +15 versus light. So it was 12 at first, and they're like, yeah, we'll knock 2 off, but then give 15 for light. This is gonna be gory versus Hydras. This is gonna be filthy versus Marines, let me tell you. Damage per upgrade has been changed from, you know, just 1 every time to essentially now it's 1 every time unless you're fighting against light, in which case it's 2, so it's going to be even more devastating to the light units. And the range by default was increased, so the way that the Colossus used to be was come out with 6 range and be pretty damn worthless until you got Thermal Lance, and then it would be really strong because the Thermal Lance would give you 9 range, which is just massive. Now they made it where, okay, the Colossus is better by default without Thermal Lance because it has 7 range. The max range is going to be the same because we're going to, like, they basically took one of the range points out of Thermal Lance, added it to the default, and made Thermal Lance cheaper. So now the Colossus is better by default, and the upgrade is less important, and it's less expensive, and the Colossus decimates light units. Like, I don't even... Like, you think the Hydraling Baneling meta was annoying? Like, the Colossus is your savior. You make one, like, you make a couple of these things in a couple of centuries, like, the Hydraling Baneling is gonna look like a joke. Colossus, just read it. Carrier. Maybe reducing interceptors from 50 to 5 wasn't a good idea. I love how they're just incrementally going up and up and up, like, yeah guys, interceptors should probably still cost money. I know you wanted to make them free, but... So the High Templar, this is like a total newbie change where they're giving it like a... They're giving the High Templar an auto attack. And this was very similar to when they made the Infestor slower, and it was actually a buff to Zerg. Because back then, this is like in 2011, the Infestor was really quick. So... But back then, even pro gamers were kind of shitty about appropriately hotkeying their army. So if you A-move everything in, the Infestors are going to run out in front of your Roaches and die. Because your Spellcaster doesn't have an attack. So when you A-move a Spellcaster into your opponent's army, it walks. Like a unit with an attack animation, you say A-move, it gets to the part where it can attack, and it attacks. A Spellcaster with no auto-attack can't attack. So if you attack, move it, or move command into your opponent's army, it just dies. It walks forward as opposed to fighting. So they're giving the High Templar a token attack to make it easier for bad players to control them. Whatever. Like, unless this attack is really strong, and it doesn't really matter. Also, this would matter if you're trying to catch out High Templar. Like, if you're Zerg and you have like a little Ling pack on the side and the Protoss moves out and their High Templar are at the back because they're slow, and you try to run in with Lings at the back of their army and pick off High Templar, the auto attack might be the difference between them being able to get, like, if the army is not very far away from the Templar, then the Templar auto attack should give them the damage they need to for the main army to double back and save the Templar. That's one of the only situations I can imagine. The mothership is the same as it was before, pretty much. They're adding a new option for the observer to be able to put it in surveillance mode, which is essentially like super hold position, where you hit a button and the vision radius extends a little, 25%, but it can't move. Like, half the time you don't even move your observers anyway. You have one in front of your opponent's natural ramp. Maybe if you're playing PvT, you have a couple out on the edges of your base to spot for drops, but usually you're not, and then you usually have one observer that you are moving around and maybe one on their army, okay? But most observers stay static because you want them in specific important locations to see information, you know? So they're making it where you can just lock observers down. This is 100%, again, to help Protoss players who just use F2 way too much. Now, if you use F2 as Protoss and you have a bunch of observers, like let's say the same scenario, I have one observer outside my nat to look for drops, one observer outside in the dead space of my main to look for drops, and one outside his natural. If I hit F2 in a panic, it's going to pull all those observers back, and I'm going to have 3 observers flying over my main army. This change simply dictates that you can kind of just like deselect observers from F2, essentially. Whatever. I don't really use F2 that much. So they're nerfing the Infestor into the ground. Now, the Zerg changes by far, I think, are the least exciting. And you have to look at the history of the Infestor to understand it. It was absolutely busted in 2012 at the end of Wings of Liberty. The fungal was instant. It did bonus damage to armored. There was no projectile. It just boom, it caught you. And the infested Terrans had more HP. They were better, and the upgrades actually applied. So Blizzard beat the shit out of the Infestor with the Nerf bat, and then they did probably one of the dumbest things they ever could have done, which was made the Infestor be able to use abilities while burrowed. Now they took one of the most powerful abilities in the game, the fungal growth, which has absolutely devastating effects on your army if you get caught off guard, especially Terran Bio. And they said, well, the one factor that makes the Infestor the strongest, the element of surprise, we're just going to give it to them always. That's a really good idea. So you put Protoss and Terran players in the situation where they can just get completely hosed by this burrowed fungal nonsense. And as a Zerg player, like, I don't feel like I have talents when I have burrowed Infestors and I just do 2 big fungals and they can't see them and they lose their whole army. Now before, when you had to have the Infestor above ground to use the abilities, even then you could implement burrow, use burrow to hide the Infestors, and then pop up and use the abilities. That was a strategy. It's something that someone like Destiny would do, and something that required talent and forethought. This was just thoughtless and ham-fisted to give such a powerful ability the ability to be used while burrowed. Before, you saw Infestors out and they were above ground when they had to be above ground use abilities. The Terran player, the Protoss player, would be aware. It was fair. It's like, oh shit, he has Infestors. You know, obviously that first reveal of Infestors was still really powerful, but you could see the Infestors. You know, they're in plain sight. You can actually micro against them. And even then, like, if the Zerg positions intelligently, they can still catch you off guard. So I thought the Infestor was in an alright spot, and then they made it where it could do everything while burrowed. And I don't know why they did that. So now they're gutting fungal growth. They're increasing the radius a little, but it no longer hits air units. So you can't use it versus Muta. You can no longer go Infestors and Muta versus Muta, which I don't even know how I feel about that. But versus Protoss air, nope. Like Phoenix Cloud, no. Sorry, you're not going to ever be able to catch that Phoenix Cloud again. What about like Void Rays? No, the harassing void ray standing over your natural and dead area you're not going to be able to catch anymore. And I could go on and on. And they're literally making the fungal growth off of creep just be shitty. Not even a snare or a root anymore. It's now a movement speed reduction by only 50%. Oh, but if they charge onto your creep and you hit them with fungal, it actually works like fungal. Terrible. Infested Terran, work with upgrades again. Infested Terran, damage decreased. Infested Terran, rifle no longer hits air. And then they get this new thing called acid spores, which presumably hit air. Which do hit air, excuse me. I don't know why I keep like saying the changes as though they're a question. I guess in my head it's like, well, would they really do this? Could they be this stupid? Could they be so stupid as to have a unit that is that powerful, nerf it, get it to a decent spot, and be like, you know what would really make this really powerful spellcaster pop? If we gave it the ability to do everything hidden. Like, who thought that was a good idea? So now Blizzard is saying, well, the Infestor is really not fun to play against. It's just like 2012, guys. We're going to nerf the shit out of it again because it's not fun to play against. The Infestor right now is not fun to play against because of the burrow changes. You don't need to do any of this bullshit. You don't have to make fungal not worth first air. You don't have to make fungal not work off of creep. Just revert the burrow change. Go back to being able to, okay, I see they're powerful spellcasters. I can react. That's what's reasonable for Terran and Protoss. It's not fun to hose people with burrowed infestors as Zerg. It's not fun to get hosed by it. That's usually like a really, really good rule of thumb on whether something should stay in the game. If it's not even fun for the race that's winning, pretty corny. And just to wrap up on the Infestor, Blizzard has essentially took a unit like the Infestor that was insanely strong, nerfed it and said, okay, like it's a projectile, no longer damage versus armored. Infested Terrans are a joke. And they said, but like still, fungal was really useful still. So you know you could make the Infestor and it was strong. And essentially what Blizzard said was, well, now that the Infestor has actually lived up to its purpose, which was being like a useful spellcaster, we're going to turn it back into an annoying gimmick unit that's annoying to play against. I just don't get any of this at all. So the Lurker. Blizzard has realized that if you want to do like a mid-game Lurker timing push, it's almost impossible because you have to tech up to layer to get the Hydra Den, and then once you get the Hydra Den, you have to get Hydra Speed. It's a must-get upgrade. That takes a hot minute, and then you have to make a Lurker Den from the Hydra Den. It morphs from the Hydra Den. It takes forever. Essentially what Blizzard's doing is they're making a whole new building, the Lurker Den. So now, like, you still have to get Lair, obviously, but now you can go Hydra, get the upgrade, and go Lurker, like get the Lurker Den at the same time. And then they're giving the Lurkers an upgrade called Digging Claws, which makes them faster and increases their burrow movement speed. I've actually been using Lurkers quite a bit, and I think they're really fun and really powerful, especially against Protoss, because if you are good at sniping detection, like, you can really devastate Protoss players. And even Terran, like, I've tried hold position Lurkers and had some decent success. Like, I feel like they're really underrated. If Terran is never going to make a Raven, ever, like, see, you know, for 6 years, Terrans really haven't been making Ravens, except for like the past 6 months, which, like, kind of funny that they decide to finally fix the Raven after, like, alright, people are actually making it other than like mass Avillo style mech, like, let's change it. Although granted, I do like the Raven changes, maybe minus the mech medevac, but this is good. This is going to be like really hard for some new players if like mid-range Zergs figure out how to do really filthy Lurker pushes, and this upgrade is as good as I think it's going to be. Like, you're going to have to learn to play against Lurker, because as it stands, I think the Lurker has always been somewhat useful, but it's kind of underused. So they're making the Viper Parasitic Bomb not stack, and they're increasing the damage. So the way Parasitic Bomb works now is like the Protoss, you have the Protoss Godly Air Army, and you just fly forward with all, you A-move your Hydras into the Death Storm, and like spam click Parasitic Bomb all over the carriers and hope you kill the army. In my experience, usually doesn't work, but They're essentially saying like, right now that everyone just uses the Viper like that, and we want to make it. I don't know. I don't know. Can be used more confident about targeted enemies being destroyed. Okay. Pretty sure half of this water has ended up on my shirt this cast somehow. Anyway, the Overseer. Much like the Observer, we wanted to try making the Overseer less likely to run to its doom if a player was intending. New ability, Oversight. Okay, whatever. So they're giving the Overseer the same bullshit as the Overseer. I mean, this is completely irrelevant. When does Zerg ever have like? It's not. Overseers aren't invisible. They don't have them set up in plain sight. Like, I think they're just doing this so like bad Zerg players on the Battle.net forums can't see like, oh, Protoss is so easy because when they hit F2, their things that they have to spot don't get drug along. Like, do Overseers even get caught in your army if you hit F2? Like, I use F2 so little I don't even know. Especially with Zerg. Like, Protoss and Terran, sometimes I'm a little bit guilty of the F2, but never with Zerg. No one has ever. I'm just trying to think of a situation in which someone would use this. Maybe they could. The only situation is like, okay, I'm gonna make an Overseer, and then I like kind of know where his tech's gonna be, so I'll get close where I'm just out of his vision range, and then do the increase in vision, and like click on his building, get a peek of what it is, and then fly away without him knowing I scouted him. That's the only applicable use I could think of that, but this is pretty goofy. The Passion Host, probably the worst unit to ever grace the game of StarCraft 2. Pretty much ruined HOTS single-handedly, ZVP at least. Another unit, I hate losing to it, I hate making it. Not really any purpose for it other than to beat mech. Which, it's really weird for me that Blizzard they go to all this trouble to make mech viable, and like, I feel like at a certain point, mech just isn't fun to play against. Like, if you ever enjoyed playing against mech, why are they so hell-bent on like, it's almost as though Blizzard will do anything they can to get pure mech to work. Almost as though like, well, pure mech worked in Brood War, like we have to get it to work in StarCraft 2, but I mean, the medevac is so insanely strong, like the ability to drop and to heal all in one unit. Like if you go back and play StarCraft Remastered or Brood War, like building medics and then having to tech up and build dropships is really inconvenient. So anyway, back to the Swarm Host. They're nerfing its speed off of creep. Okay, like, so as it stands, obviously it's really annoying to play against Swarm Host. The Locusts fly into your main, you kill them, say, okay, gotta go find the Swarm Host and hunt them down. Now it'll be easier to do that. Whatever, like, in my opinion, in an ideal world, they get rid of the Swarm Host and they stop trying to like, I feel like Blizzard is trying to buff mech, but they're always trying to buff mech in this paradigm of like, how can we get mech to work but still have the Swarm Host in the game? It's like, well, you really can't. Like, the Swarm Host is a really poorly designed unit that was made exclusively to break like meching players or like really turtly Protosses, but it's not really a good unit, and I feel like Blizzard kind of shoots themselves in the foot by always saying like, well, Zerg has to have the Swarm Host, but no, forget the Swarm Host. Figure out a way to let Zerg deal with those styles in other ways. We don't want free units. Broodlord is enough, okay? You have to tech all the way up to Greater Spire. I've had it with the Swarm Host. Playing against it, playing with it, it's a piece of shit and I don't like it. So I know this has been a long video, but to wrap things up, I think possibly my favorite change is this Chrono Boost. In my opinion, Chrono Boost was like a really fun part of playing Protoss. Chrono boosting your upgrade, like if you effectively Chrono boosted your upgrades, it was one of those things where like you could look back at the replay and say, look at this, like I macroed pretty well. And any time that Blizzard puts things in the game where you can do and like it takes skill, and if you macro well you get rewarded, that's good. The change to have the Chrono, I'm not going to talk about that again. So I like the Chrono change. The Colossus change is pretty bonkers. Here's the thing. I feel like the Colossus was always pretty strong, even after it got nerfed. And Protoss, even when the Hydra Bane meta came in, I never saw Protoss players go two base Robo Colossus all in, or like try Colossus openers. It was like, what if we just make more Adepts? What it like, it was always Twilight or Stargate into Twilight, Archon drop, like, or like he's going Hydra Bane. Let me make 10 Immortals. I don't know how many PVZs I've seen where like Protoss players do that nonsense, and like, yeah, obviously in the mid game you need Immortals, but I just feel like Protoss players kind of forget about the Colossus or undervalued it, and Blizzard's saying like, alright, that we're going to buff the shit out of it, so you have to make it. And I think this is absolute overkill. I'll have to play with it, but this is going to be like, say goodbye to Hydraling Bane. Like, Hydraling Bane gone. Like, that build style was kind of obnoxious and not really fun to play against his Protoss, so, eh. I actually like to do Hydraling Bane into Lurker, which was just like absolutely disgusting to play against. Let's see. I don't like the Infestor change at all. Like, just go back to not being able to cast Fungal Underground. Real simple. This is gonna be crazy. Alright, that's the vid. Peace out.